Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Late Sub. We have a super week for you. We have a lot going on. There are some huge international football implications happening this week. We've got another really wacky week of college basketball. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to start focusing in on some of the bigger picture of some of these bigger sports. So what we have for you today is a super episode just on the U.S. Women's National Team and the Gold Cup. As you guys have been following along, there have been some downs and some ups and some downs. So first, we're going to address Monday's loss against Mexico, and then we are going to have a fabulous chat with Sandra Herrera of CBS Sports talking big picture Gold Cup and some of the highs, perhaps, of the first two games of the United States 2024 campaign. We came back together here on Tuesday, February 27th. It is the morning of Tuesday, February 27th, to address the United States game on Monday night, which was their group stage closer against Mexico, because that is worth discussing immediately, which is that the U.S. lost that game 2-0 against Mexico. That's the first time that Mexico has defeated the United States since 2010. That is the first time the United States has lost to CONCACAF competition in the United States since 2000. And it is the first time that they have ever lost a game in the state of California. I would say it was interesting, but I think actually what makes it interesting is that it wasn't really that interesting at all, or necessarily that surprising outside of some of the individual issues that the United States had. Mexico looked really, really good in their game against the Dominican Republic. They put a lot of goals on that team, and that was the most complete Mexico performance I've seen in, I think, my adult life. Again, talking about going back to the last time Mexico beat the U.S., or most complete performance I've seen them play against the United States. They were really, really tactical with their defensive press. They were coming in not only to pressure people on the ball, but they also cut off passing lanes. I think they were really, really smart to try some goals from distance. Both of the goals scored. One was off of a defensive error from Becky Sauerbrunn, but it was a beautiful lob from Jackie Ovalle. And then the second goal was just a banger from distance late in the game. Shooters shoot. If you watch Liga MX Femenil, you know that those players are not afraid to shoot from distance. So what happened? If you're catching up, you're 2024, you're thinking, what? The vibes are good. They've got this new coach. We're trying new things. We're doing all these, this is the new U.S. Women's National Team. They're fun. They're exciting. And my conversation with Sandra that I recorded yesterday will reflect that. We will get to some of the positives, but I think that it's worth getting into what went wrong a little bit without making too many declarative statements over one game. So I want to talk about the starting lineup real quick. Sandra and I are about to discuss how well we think the United States teenagers have done at the Gold Cup this year. We talked a little bit about the gap that we see between those truly younger players coming in that are fearless and the older players, the veterans that have a lot of experience, and just think on kind of those two groups of talent when I lay out this list. So U.S. starting 11 was Alyssa Nair, Abby Dahlkemper, Becky Sauerbrunn, Lynn Williams, Lindsey Horan, Sophia Smith, Rose Lavelle, Sam Coffey, Crystal Dunn, Trinity Rodman, and Emily Fox. So I believe of that list, the only player that did not have World Cup experience was Sam Coffey. Obviously, a number of these players had many World Cups behind them. This is an older back line. This is a back line reminiscent of the pairing that we saw in 2019. This, to me, at the very beginning of this game, when they announced this lineup, was me going, oh, is this the team settling into what they consider to be their experienced lineup? Is this perhaps them taking this game a little more seriously? This is less about experimentation and more about settling down into an 11 that they want to take into the knockout stages. I'm going to be completely honest. I asked myself, is Naomi Girma dealing with a fitness issue? Why have we only seen her for one game? You guys know 3 weeks ago, I said I didn't want to see much of Alyssa Nair in this group stage. She started 2 games in the group stage, the first and the third. This is one of those lineups that reminded me a lot of Vlatko Andonovski's approach, to be frank, where you can see kind of why they put this group together, what they were basing it on, which is a lot of experience, the ability theoretically to control tempo, one would think, with a certain amount of quality on the ball, calm on the ball, retain possession, don't give Mexico too many chances, and control the game while saving legs for the knockout stage. And what actually happened was some truly kind of alarming performances or lack of cohesion that made you go, oh, maybe we need to see more of a full rebuild from this team. Now, all the same caveats apply. This is NWSL preseason. The U.S. doesn't always look very good at the beginning of the calendar year, all of this stuff. And I also just want to keep crediting Mexico. When I criticize the United States, I'm criticizing them the same way I would criticize them against like Portugal last year in the World Cup, or criticize them against World Cup competition, for example, or like that draw that they got against Colombia at the end of last year. Mexico played like a World Cup team last night. The center back pairing of Dahlkemper and Sauerbrunn did not look particularly comfortable on the ball. The spacing was very, very conservative, despite leaving a lot of space in transition. Mexico's game plan was incredibly sound, which is that when they did get the ball, they didn't try to hold on to it for too long. They had some pretty nice diagonal long ball passing to probe that center back pairing. And that was when you saw the opener. It was a beautiful long ball targeting Sauerbrunn. They pulled Dunn forward. Dunn gets pulled forward. She can't make the recovery run. Sauerbrunn is stuck in a 1v1 situation, and you see a brilliant strike, a brilliant little lob from distance. Saw Dahlkemper slow to touch the ball. It really seemed like the only player that was presenting some sharpness was Emily Fox, but then Fox kind of needed to cover too much ground to be effective in the defense. Again, I don't know how to speak unilaterally about what these players are going to look like this summer, but I must say that the concern in terms of form, fitness, experience, and the coaching philosophy here, what was your plan for recovery speed on the back line? What was the plan for that quick press, long ball? This was a very direct style of play from Mexico. They played into their strengths really well. These are mostly players who are in season in Liga MX Femenil. They're more played in. They looked better individually, and they looked better as a team. So the U.S. looked a little bit naive, and I think that was a word that we used a lot in the Andonovski era, that slow start, coming in thinking they're going to be able to control traffic, control tempo. Suddenly a team shoves them a little bit, pops them a little bit, and they don't know how to recover. That was what we saw in the first half of this game. The subs didn't really necessarily make it super better. I think when you make a mistake with your back four, I know that they had been playing in sort of this 3-4-2-1, 4-2-3-1, but they had to sit more into a four back as it was clear that they were getting burnt in transition. When you make that kind of mistake with your defensive personnel, it limits what you can do with your subs, the subs themselves, rather than, again, putting those teenagers on, putting those less experienced players on. We saw Alex Morgan come in. I don't think there was a lot Alex Morgan could do. They placed her out wide. And actually, I think maybe the thing that should both concern and calm U.S. fans the most is that this was after the game was increasingly out of reach. It wasn't necessarily that the U.S. picked up tempo. They actually slowed things down a little bit in the final 15 minutes, and it looked like they were getting more chances. They were getting more looks. But there is, I think, a genuine question here. Again, you go back to that starting 11, you go to that starting midfield of Coffey, Lavelle, and Horan. And then they brought Emily Sonnet on in the second half to try to calm things down, I suppose. They brought Alex Morgan on. They brought more experienced players on, more players from the 2023 World Cup. And I think the bigger picture question in the failure to make an equalizer, a failure to come back, I don't actually blame anyone for that final strike. They were pushing for a goal. It was a quick transition, and that was an incredible strike for Mexico at the end of the game. Is this the group? It's the same question, I think, over and over and over again. 2022, 2023, 2024, these players, this lineup, these experienced players with World Cup experience. You're going to hear Sandra and I talk about 2023 sort of in this rearview mirror of, did we learn anything from that tournament? Did the U.S. walk away from that feeling like they had built in experience for players that needed it, or tactically had made any sort of headway with the style of play that they want to play? I don't think we saw that last night. I think we saw Twyla Kilgore go back to some of the safety that we saw a lot with the Andonovski era that did not work. And then also she didn't really know how to adjust in the moment, which I think puts the U.S. in a tricky position because they have a new coach coming in a couple of months who is not in camp. She's going to have a lot of tape to react to, but she's not the one making these changes. She's not the one adjusting the approach here. And this is the downside of having a long-term interim before you have a head coach come in crunch time. So I present this to you, the United States Women's National Team fan. Let's hold hands, let's close our eyes, and let's think. I think the U.S. has always had an okay opinion of papering over cracks with experience, so long as you get the result. I think last night, perhaps in an Andonovski game, maybe they got out just a really ugly 0-0 draw out of that. They make the defensive adjustments. They maybe put out a different starting back four, and they do not put anything exciting up going forward, but they hold Mexico off and they draw 0-0 and they say, okay, we won the group. That was scary, but we won the group. We didn't lose the game. That didn't happen. The cracks are too wide. The papering over isn't working. It might be because there's an interim manager. It might simply be because these players are out of form and they're older and they don't have the pace to back it up. So what happens now? I go back kind of to what I said at the very beginning of our chats about the U.S. this year, which is, what do we want to get out of this? If you're losing, were you brave? And I think what we did not see in that game was a brave team with a brave lineup lose. We saw a team trying to hold off a negative result with players that don't necessarily need to be out there on the field right now, and they still lost. We can get into the larger mentality, mystique, leadership. Those are all really important, and I do not know exactly how you address them without the permanent head coach there. That's going to be probably lying on those experienced players in the same way that was their responsibility in the last couple of years. And I think you could see the strain of that in the 2021 Olympics and the 2023 World Cup. So all of that being said, if things aren't working, you should shake things up, because if you're going to lose, you should do it while learning something. And that has been the mantra, I think, for the United States truly since 2019. And they still have not struck that balance well. They do make it into the knockout stages. I still actually like their chances in the quarterfinals. I don't think this particular performance necessarily means that we're not going to see them in the later stages of this tournament. But full credit to Mexico. Fantastic game plan. What growth from World Cup qualifying in 2022. That was a great game in many ways, if you were not a United States fan, I suppose. And then for the U.S., I know you have to manage fitness. I know this is inopportune timing. But like I said, if you're going to lose big, be brave, start the young players, let them fail, because this approach hasn't been working for a long time and increasingly is not working as the tactical awareness of the teams that you are playing grows and changes. So if that bummed you out, we're about to go back in time to yesterday when I had a wonderful chat with Sandra Herrera of CBS Sports about the United States' first two games of the group stage, which actually did have a lot of positives. And I think perhaps hopefully with this addendum and that conversation, you'll see the big picture. All right, so this is a very exciting day on the Late Sub. In the Late Sub history, we have our first ever guest, and it could not be a better person. This is Sandra Herrera, soccer writer, podcast host for CBS Sports, and also just my good friend. Hey, Sandra, how's it going?
That you buried the lead. That's what you should have led with. It's awesome. It's going awesome. I mean, look, I don't want to date ourselves here, but it's been pretty nice out here in Chicago in February.
True.
So it's been nice to have the nice weather, and it was great to hear from you saying like, hey, let's pod. And I said, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, so Sandra and I have been chopping it up in these soccer streets for many, many years on many different levels, but that's what made her so perfect to bring on to the Late Sub this week, because we're going to be getting into the Gold Cup. We have two U.S. games to talk about, two full rounds of the Gold Cup group stage. We're recording this on Monday, as we always do, so final round begins this evening. We're going to have another fun section where we talk about things and predict things, and we'll find out later if we're right. We're going to jump right into the U.S. and then look a little bit bigger picture in a minute. So the United States opened their group stage campaign with 2 wins, a 5-0 win over Dominican Republic, 4-0 win over Argentina. Seemed like we got a mix of some of that kind of Twyla Kilgore pragmatism combined with some Emma Hayes tinkering. Sandra, I'll let you take it first. Big picture, overall impressions of what we saw from the first 2 games for the U.S. in 2024.
Refreshing. Like honestly, like that's been my kind of biggest takeaway from the early group stage. I think heading into this, that's those were things on my own wish list for the Gold Cup and the USWNT. I was like, okay, it's a quote unquote inaugural version of this tournament. You know, it's like for years, CONCACAF found themselves putting on competitions for senior women's national team, but for a long time they were always tied to like qualification processes. So whether it was like World Cup or Olympics, it's like here you also get a trophy with it. So it was nice to kind of have this its own iteration for senior women's national teams. And with all new things brings lots of excitement, no matter who you are, I think. But for the United States, having interim head coach Twyla Kilgore, knowing there's going to be an incoming manager in Emma Hayes, I was like, I want to see different stuff. Like, just to put it simply, I want to see player rotation. We want to see different starting 11s. We want to see more specifically like different units of players. Like we want to see those trios or those duos kind of getting more minutes with each other, more time for less cap players. And these 2 couple games in the group stage, I think you kind of delivered on that already.
Well, talking about different stuff, I mean, I think that the talk of the first 2 games have to be either like new faces or truly these teens, right? We got some U.S. women's national team teenagers stepping up, balling out. Olivia Moultrie had a brace in the first game against Dominican Republic. Jaden Shaw had a brace in the second game against Argentina. You can go to the U.S. women's national team's like Twitter page and they'll be like, this is the first time since 1991 that this has happened. And this is the first time ever that these things have happened. We're seeing some unprecedented success from the teens. How excited should we be about these young players? And for you, are they making legitimate cases, do you think, for this Olympic roster this year? Or is this truly evaluating for 2027 for you?
I think they're making a case. I really do. I think at this point, I think we all spoke so much about who that next USWNT manager is going to be, and how ultimately we all viewed it kind of similarly, where it was like, okay, U.S. soccer has conceded a little bit of buildup to the Olympics in order to get their ideal candidate. And if we're looking at that kind of concept on the higher level than the coaching side of things, I don't know why we can't have a similar perspective of like, yeah, sure, we're 5 months out for the Olympics, so why not get some of these kids a run out in a major international
right? There's
tournament?
No reason to like paper over anything,
Yeah.
right? Like we
100%.
are exposing the cracks, and the good news is that these kids are balling. Why go all out to worry too much about cohesion going into the Olympics when we have this coaching situation, right?
Yes, 100%. And I think, look, this is sports, right? We're talking about women's sports because they're sports. And I think kind of looking into this Gold Cup, we all were kind of like, all right, there's a bit of a major tournament here for them to kind of get a crack at. And then they're still going to also have She Believes Cup. And then there's going to be an Olympics. Like there are some opportunities here. So why not? And so I love that Olivia Moultrie got off to a really good start in that opening game. I know we're both very high on Jaden Shaw and really rate her. I think at this point, there's an argument for Jaden Shaw to absolutely have a spot on this Olympic roster. I think if you're looking at a 23 player roster from the World Cup and how you have to narrow that down to 18, well, who can possibly be left off and who could possibly, quote unquote, take a space? I think Jaden Shaw is one of those players. I think there's an argument to be made that there are some players who are on the outside looking in right now who are not part of this camp, whether it's a Sofia Huerta or Neshley Sanchez, who are not haven't been in these last couple camps and who are not in this Gold Cup, that are maybe taking a look at themselves and what's happening in this Gold Cup and maybe challenging themselves to have a really good opening NWSL season, because Olivia Moultrie or Jaden Shaw are absolutely delivering both for club and now at this point for country.
I specifically think Shaw, and I've talked about this before, probably on like many different channels. One of the things that she really has over even perhaps like a Moultrie or some of the other players that she's competing with is her versatility, right? Like these two goals against Argentina are actually like the perfect example. One of them was this really sick a shot from wide. She's really good from wide angles. She lined up kind of ostensibly as a winger in that game. Yeah. And then also her second goal was this just like laces through it, perfect strike centrally. So she's a player that can play winger. She's a player that can play in that sort of false nine playmaking role. Do you think there's room? This is like big picture stuff. Do you think there's room on an Olympic roster for, or maybe the better question is, we have our specialists on the U.S., right? We have our players that we know are really good in one specific role. Do you think that element of versatility could be the kind of thing that gets a player like Shaw into a roster like this one?
Yeah, I do. I don't think it's too early enough. Yeah, it's all big picture, but I don't think it's too early enough to at least sort of kind of
It's an
label
asset,
her.
at least,
Yeah,
to what
it's
she
a
can
little
do.
bit
Yeah.
like, here are the things that she can provide for the team. And we hear so much about how when you enter those types of major international tournaments, how important it is to strike balance, whether that roster is 23 people long or 18 people long. The whole idea of like, there has to be a good balance. You have to have your players who are in their prime, your present day, usual suspects, as you're alluding to. You even have to have maybe a veteran or two who have been there before and can make sure that this team is kind of all together. And that also includes having some young ones, some less capped players, less experienced players. And in the United States case, I think maybe that we're alluding to that it means teenagers in this aspect.
Yeah,
so
right.
I'm with it. I think there's room for it, whether, like I said, whether it's 23 or 18, that there can be room for a player like Shaw. And I think something like her versatility is only going to add to her case.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point too, because I think especially with this roster, and this will kind of seg into, I think, the next topic of conversation, which I think a lot of people have been interested in, is sort of that ever-changing center forward position that got so disrupted at the beginning of last week, and we've seen a variety of different things. But what does it say? This is the last question, kind of really focusing on this next generation, and I think you can include young players like Corbin Albert in that. You can even probably go back to say Naomi Girma is in this role if you look at sort of that 5-year period of this next generation of players. And this is my big question, my big kind of thing that I have brewing, which I'm curious to see how this looks in the context of an Emma Hayes roster, which is the US going to start maybe just having these two generations with a little bit of a gap in between, where they're comfortable with their like veteran players and they're comfortable with the really young ones? Because we saw that World Cup roster last year get kind of filled in with a lot of these really quality league players who are maybe in their mid to late 20s. Those are not necessarily the players we see as much in this camp. Do you think that there might be some longtime veterans involved here this summer, plus some truly young players?
Yeah, I do. I don't think I look, again, balance is all relative, and we're not the coaches, and they're the ones that are going to have to nail down those 18 names to a list. But again, I just think for bigger picture purposes, I don't know if this Paris Olympics is actually included in that. If anything, I feel like this Paris Olympic Games is really truly going to be the catapult for what it means in 2027. So all these little areas of concession to get your ideal head coach, to make sure you're getting less cap players or newer faces in camp, like all of those small little concessions that you're making right now, I think will continue. It's a good possibility that it can continue into the Olympic Games for 2027. So I wouldn't mind that. Like, I wouldn't be opposed to that. If we end up getting an Olympic roster that drops tomorrow, dude, for some reason, and it happens to be like very split like that in some sense, I'm not going to be one of these talking heads that's like, this is disaster. What does it mean? And then, but I think you and I are a little bit different, I think, when it comes to a lot of talking heads in this space. So if anything, it's something that I would kind of embrace and try to see, like, okay, well, what does this really mean and what's going to happen here? And then there's also that concept of like high risk and high reward, right? What does it mean if tomorrow they drop an Olympic roster, and it really is sort of split like that. And you've got so many young players or quote unquote unexperienced players, and they go out and they win the whole damn thing. It's like
Right.
going to be incredible, right? So it's like,
Or they
you win some,
don't,
you
but
lose
you're
some.
building on something, right?
Yeah.
Like that was, I think, one of the most disappointing things for a lot of people with the 2023. I mean, quote unquote,
Yeah.
disappointment, not failure, but disappointment
Yeah.
in the World Cup is it was like, okay, so what did we learn here? What did we build? Like, obviously,
Yeah.
there were bright spots, right? I mean, I think you look at the defense,
Girma, yeah.
especially the central defense. You know, Girma is a huge bright spot. And I think, you know, you look at the ongoing development, hopefully, that we might see from someone like Sophia Smith, Trinity Rodman, learning from those experiences. But the team looks braver now. I mean, it's a little bit easier to say against maybe some of this group stage competition, but I thought it was very clever how they retained the two defensive midfielders while making it like very attacking. I was like, oh, that's a twist I wasn't necessarily expecting. We're keeping the two defensive midfielders, but we're moving into this really attacking formation. So I'm with it. I mean, we're the same. We want it to be creative. We want it to be brave. We're fine with some failures. Like if that Leroquette bomb had gone in that Argentina game, it's like all the better. Game on. Yeah, exactly.
I know.
I like it. So let's talk about the longtime veterans, because I think a lot of people are asking this. Well, I mean, they were asking this question at the end of 2023. This is one of the big questions, especially in the face of the Mia Fischel injury. Alex Morgan was brought back into the squad. And I'm going to repeat something that I feel like I've been saying over and over and over again, which is that I feel like Alex Morgan has been put in a difficult position.
Yeah, man.
And so aren't we all, you know? Came in last minute as an injury replacement. I mean, you don't want to place too much symbolism into it, but you can't think of more of maybe a symbolic look at what this actually is as like the Alex Morgan number 7. This is not like penned in starter Alex Morgan 13. This is like, oh, we kind of got a fresh slate. And it seems like that's been positive for team and for player a little bit. She's got 2 goals in 2 games, 1 from the penalty spot, 1 from open play. Maybe just thoughts there of Alex Morgan put into a difficult position, kind of similarly maybe to the way that she was in some of the Andonovski teams of 2022 and 2023. Yeah. What do you think is making it easier for her to execute in this system?
I hate to be this way because I don't like to be one that dwells in the past, but sometimes the job requires that. But I think people forget a little bit coming out of that 2023 World Cup that a lot of what we heard, whether it was on the like media, game day, press conferences side of things, or even in content all around the World Cup, you know, in their Netflix documentary, whatever, everything that we heard coming out of that 2023 World Cup, we unfortunately heard from players specifically that there just wasn't a lot of communication in terms of identifying roles, perhaps maybe some cross wires in terms of game plan. And I think people forget a little bit in combination with the fact that there were some young players on that roster, that there were a ton of players, like majority of the roster that had never been to a World Cup. I think people forget in that sort of collection of things that there were veterans who were also part of that team. And that included a Megan Rapinoe, that included an Alex Morgan. And I think if you're hearing player narrative that there was some miscommunication or misunderstanding of roles, that I think that's actually across the board there. So I would say what's different from then to now might be that there's a little bit better communication, that there's a bit more clarity in terms of player roles, responsibilities, and things that they're being asked of. So I think kind of moving fast forward these 5 months later or 6 months later that Twyla Kilgore has sort of been at the face of this team, I think we're starting to see that, and maybe we need to give her some applause for that a little bit, or a little bit of praise in terms of getting these players kind of back in that mindset and locked into those types of things. I think we're starting to see it. Like, we're hearing a lot coming out of this group stage of Gold Cup that players are, we're hearing freedom, we're hearing fluidity, we're hearing fun. We're hearing all these like buzzwords that is like a collective messaging of these teams, and I would include Alex Morgan in that. So,
and they credit Kilgore constantly for being a clear communicator, which does feel, again, not pointed. They're not making a point, but it is noticeable to them because it is a change. Change is noticeable to people, right? And so you can tell that there's that change in the way they're being communicated with.
100%.
I agree with that. Yeah. Obviously, it would be great for the U.S. to have a 100% healthy, open competition from like all available center forwards going into the Olympics. It seems like that's not going to be the case. Obviously, unfortunately, Mia Fishel is no longer going to be part of that group. Who knows kind of what the goal is for Katerina Macario. If there's anything I know about Emma Hayes, it's that they're not going to do anything that threatens that player's long-term health. We don't know kind of where someone like Ashley Hatch sits. Maybe she's kind of a more similar, like, let's see what you can do in the league. And to be completely honest, I don't really know even who is on the radar for that 4th, 5th, 6th in line. Smith, probably. They start bringing those wide players in, or players who can play centrally that are already in the system. But I'll go on record here and say that I think that Alex Morgan still has a lot to give to the United States. And I don't think that means that she has to play exactly like she did 10 years ago.
Yep.
But she's a smart player. She's got a lot of experience. And I think this doesn't have to be a 2023 Redux with new leadership. That's my stance.
Ditto.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. See, this is why I like you on the podcast, Sandra, is we agree on things.
Yep, that's right.
Just talking formational stuff with the U.S. before we kind of wrap up this part. Other things I liked how they're using their wide players a lot more. I think we saw Midge Purse do very well with her skill set in the first game. Casey Kruger, I think, in the attack was really impressive in the second game. That cross she sent in
oh my god,
for her assist was so
you want
nice.
to talk about
talk a little bit, talk about the width, Sandra.
I was going to say, you want to talk a little bit about like showing love to Alex Morgan. My literal reaction, I'll expose myself watching this game, because you and I have been here before, my dude. This is not unfamiliar territory for you and I when we see Casey Kruger have good games, and yet there's question marks, and we're like, why are so many not seeing what we are seeing? So when Kruger delivers this delicious dime and Alex Morgan puts it away, I literally said, thank you, Alex Morgan, for delivering for Casey Kruger. Because there have been like multiple games, I think, at this point where we've seen Casey Kruger involved, and while she's got good service and she's a fullback that is capable of getting involved in the attack, maybe there have been games where attackers haven't been able to get on the ends of those balls. And unfortunately, that maybe doesn't necessarily harm the attackers. That maybe harms the fullbacks' chances. And so seeing this happen in real time, that was my immediate reaction. I was like, thank you, Alex Morgan, for delivering for Casey Kruger. But I loved it. In the short answer, I'm loving what we're seeing in terms of the adjustments for small tackles. I think that's been one of my favorite things coming out of this, is like, what was it? What did it all mean? What did we all see? Is it a fluctuating 3-back? Is it actually kind of a 4-back, or is it like really a 2-back with like, all
I
this
was like,
so
if we don't know, all the better. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's what makes it
like, if we don't even know. Yeah.
I was like, oh, that actually makes this awesome. There was a moment there where I thought like, oh, is this actually just like the 4-2-3-1 still, except it actually has like confidence now, and it actually has freedom and fun, and players feel good about it? Is that really what we're just seeing? Because we heard Twyla Kilgore talk about that a lot. Like they wanted to build off of that Sweden game. It was that 4-2-3-1. They were progressing the ball. It felt good to them then. They just didn't get the result. Like, so is that what we're still seeing? But it's just confident and fun? I don't know. I think we got a couple more games that we got to take a look at to really see. Or maybe it's all of it. Maybe it's all the above. Maybe that's what's also really fun about this Gold Cup too, is that we're seeing their ability to be so fluid.
Yeah, and it does seem like there's a good sense in camp that this is not the be-all, end-all. We saw some players really start to feel the pressure last year, and I think probably the messaging is obviously this is very important. These are very important games, but the world will not end if you misplace a pass. The world will not end if you miss a shot, and I think that's what we were looking for. All right, final U.S. question. All right, so let's pour some water on this now. Is there
Yeah, Debbie
anything? It's a
Downers.
small sample size. I know. Small sample size. Small sample size. Is there anything that you've seen in the first two games that gives you some cause, not for like concern,
Mhm.
but just okay, this looks a little bit like what we saw last year, or these are things that they still haven't necessarily improved on a ton. I think for me, it's so
Yeah.
obvious, but just like putting it in the back of the net, right? We're still seeing kind of some struggles to close games
Yeah.
out, to pile games on. You know this as well as anybody because you guys are broadcasting the whole tournament, but
Yeah.
they're reseeding in the knockouts, right? So every goal
Yes.
counts.
Goal differential. It's a wild time. Gotta love
Yeah. So
CONCACAF.
is there anything where you're just like, ugh, I don't know if we're seeing a ton of progress just yet?
Yeah, I think for me the biggest, especially coming out of game one, I thought it was like the goal scoring. I thought it was a finishing. I think again this is the part where we get to be haters, but at the same time, it's like I can't help but think in the back of my mind where so many of these players are in preseason, and it felt that game kind of felt preseason-y a little bit.
100%.
You know, it was tragedy for players specifically, but for all of us as well who wanted to see Mia Fischel get ripping and roaring in this Gold Cup. I'm devastated that we're not going to get to see her go up against Mexico. I would have loved to have seen that. But she suffers the ACL injury. Morgan gets called in last minute. And then on top of that, you've got even less players who are in season. You know, she was one of 4 players playing in Europe right now. So that's even one less player who's not. And then on top of that, they didn't have Haran to start, you know, and it was just Corbin. And so I was like, okay, there's some of this is kind of preseason-y, and surely they will kind of get things going. But I think for all of the fun stuff that we're watching in that final third, everything that we're seeing kind of in a attacking sense, I selfishly still kind of want to see some conversion of some of these goals. I think when we're looking at and talking about versatility, maybe in regard to someone like Shaw and having that be her X factor. Well, for players like a Smith or maybe a Rodman, that's something that, you know, kind of propelled them onto that 2023 roster for the World Cup. You know, is that still going to be what does it for them come the Olympics? So it was good. I mean, look, it was good to see Robin getting touches on the ball. I would argue that Sophia Smith needs to get more of them at this point in the tournament.
Yeah.
So maybe more touches for Smith and some more goals, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think if there are, this is not to be too down on any individual player because everything you said is 100% correct. They're in preseason. They've only had a couple weeks in camp, but you want to see everyone involved, right? And I think obviously the two big names there are Trinity Rodman and Sophia Smith, and they've got plenty of games to get going. But you don't want, I mean, maybe my big thesis on Smith, especially, and Morgan, is you don't want the center forward position to be a completely thankless job, right? I think it was built in that way, in a way, in 2023, where they were almost being told, like, you're going to go grind it out, you're going to create space for your teammates, you're just going to go suffer ball, right? And I think this new look US doesn't want it to be that way. So I'm hopeful to see that for Smith in addition to what we saw with Morgan finding her spaces as well.
Yeah. And I want to keep the shutouts. I want to see the defense still deliver in that aspect. So no goals.
100%. Yeah. I want to keep it attacking football, but also, yeah, don't let it get too end to end because as we saw with Mexico against Dominican Republic, they can put a few past you.
Yeah.
So you've been watching the whole tournament because you guys are, like I said, you guys are the broadcast partners for this in the US. Let's just talk big picture real quick. We have we already know some of these teams advancing. We've seen some of these regular heavy hitters do well, right? Canada is pouring goals in Group C. Brazil has 2 wins in 2 games in Group B, including an impressive tight win over Colombia. Who for you, maybe just totally big picture, standout team for you? I think the Colombia result against Brazil was an interesting one because I think after round 1 we would have been like, oh, Colombia, they're rocking, and then now you're like, oh, okay, well, not entirely sure exactly what this means for knockouts. So do you have not a favorite necessarily, but who have you liked on both ends of the ball the most? I guess is maybe the question.
Yeah, I think recency bias. I think I liked both sides of the ball. United States has been looking really good to me. Not to knock Canada and what they've been producing, but similarly to the 2022 World Cup qualifiers, I feel like they got a group that has favored them once again, and
Yep, that's exactly what I thought. Yeah,
I think it's shocking, right? I think it's also benefiting them again in this Gold Cup. That's not to be disrespectful to the teams that are currently in their group with them, but I've been looking for a response from Costa Rica for some time. I think they struggled in 2023. They got a new coach. There's going to be a period of time where they need to finally get the things going. Then you've got Paraguay and El Salvador, who are good teams, but are also first timers in this sort of kind of built makeup of a tournament in the CONCACAF region. So I like what Bev Priestman is doing. I think on their side, they're also utilizing this tournament for some tinkering. They are showing us that they are not trying to be the same old stale Canada again, which I appreciate. But I got to see it in the knockouts. So I'm going to give the edge to United States, who have impressed me in terms of both sides of the ball. And I think I would also throw Brazil into that Canada category, where it's just like, I need to see something else before I'm really saying this is like a 2 to 4 team runaway tournament. Because right now it's looking like all USA.
Yeah, I will say that the one thing I like about Brazil are the 2 shutouts. I think that that's a good, especially that data point against Colombia. And we've mentioned on the podcast before, Colombia their rotation is slightly different because they also just don't have their first choice stars with them, so they have to do a lot of minutes management for some of their top talents. But yeah, I like Brazil. I like what Brazil's doing. I think I like their roster too. They're also tinkering. I like this tournament. It feels like everyone's just kind of cooking in the kitchen right now, like whipping up different combos,
Brazil's also like a little preseason-y. They've got so many Brazilians in NWSL, so they're like out of season. It's going to be interesting to see like who is the team that gets stronger in the knockouts,
Yeah, 100%. And then just final big picture question about Gold Cup, and maybe we can do this kind of hand in hand, because I don't think we can talk about Gold Cup without talking about probably Puerto Rico, right? And just what we've seen from them in this tournament. And I think you've talked about this a little bit, and I definitely feel this very strongly when we talk about what this Gold Cup is for. And when we're talking about these top teams who have already qualified for the Olympics, we are talking about like, this is for roster construction, this is for trying out different formations, it's for winning, but it's also for all these other things. But the Gold Cup, in terms of its existence and how deep it goes into the CONCACAF region, and maybe even hopes of expansion in the future, or it would be cool. I mean, I don't want to go too far. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if this was World Cup Olympic qualifying someday? Like those kinds of things, Tell me your impressions of what you have seen in terms of opportunity for teams that did not have a tournament like this in the past.
I want more of it. I want more of it because we're seeing what it means for a program like Puerto Rico. I want more of it because we're seeing what it means for even a program like El Salvador and Dominican Republic. I'm already ready for, this is supposed to be a competition that is every 4 years. And I'm all ready for the next one to expand just a little bit. I'm all ready to, I'm ready for there to be 10 CONCACAF teams involved instead of 8. Maybe we keep these 4 CONMEBOL invites, and maybe we figure out how to invite a couple of other teams, whether you want those from other federations or wherever. So I think its whole purpose, like the Gold Cup's whole existence and purpose, was to make sure that there was this marquee, singular, like kind of flagship major competition built for and by the region. And by extension, having qualifiers that built up to that for teams that did not make it to this point, whether that's a Suriname, right, or St. Kitts and Nevis, or a Bermuda, all the islands, the Caribbean teams that don't often get together, that don't often get an opportunity to play in tournament style competitions. That's its whole purpose, is to expand competition for the region. And I'm so happy that it's here and that it's arrived, because we're coming off of a World Cup where people thought we were crazy, dude. We were like, you know what? There just might be 6 CONCACAF teams in the 2023 World Cup. And then we were correct in that, because there were. And so it's like, you can't lose that You can't lose that momentum. Can't let it go. And so now here we are in 2024, and we're getting to see a little bit more of it. And we're also, I think, getting a chance to see, again, we got to throw water on it. We're also getting a chance to see what it means for other programs to not take control of that moment or to take ownership of the opportunity in front of them. I'm sure we can have a whole other late sub episode about our disappointment in Jamaica's federation and not getting their women's team prepared and part of this tournament. I think obviously there's timing involved with injuries and things like that for Haiti. So we're not seeing them in this tournament. They went up against a Puerto Rico team that is rising. And it's giving, it's honestly, dude, it's been giving me like shades of Panama in the build up to the World Cup qualifiers in 2019, where you see a team young coming up together and finally they intersect with the right time and right opportunity. And we got to see Yeneth Bailey introduced to the world. And now we're starting to see Sydney Martinez for Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. So it's like you see these different moments, you see these rising tides and maybe some of these, falling ships left behind, which is not a good thing. It's important for us to continue to talk about those teams who aren't here because they're here they're not here for a reason or other. So I'm loving what we're seeing from Puerto Rico. I'm loving, Brenda Seren with El Salvador and what she is presenting, for this team. So it's been a great opportunity for, I think, a lot of eyeballs to get exposed to maybe some other players from other leagues that they don't typically take a look at. And so I'm hopeful that Gold Cup continues to have success and that it expands in the future even.
Yeah. Do you one more? I agree with all of that wholeheartedly. And I think maybe the one other thing I would add is we talk a lot in the women's game about potential for growth, right? And I think you just took it on the competitive side because there's so much room for growth on the competitive side and the resource side in terms of investing in these teams. But obviously you'd want to see CONCACAF maybe recognize that, maybe this could be a cool fan experience too. Let's market this a little bit more. They've always struggled with their qualifying tournaments to kind of make it a premier experience for fans, even just to know that it's happening, or picking locations, maybe even outside the US where we think that fans would come through and want to see their teams play. And so I would say that, when we're talking about building up programming, we're building up in a way, counter programming to other regions in the world. That's a part of it too. And I think it would be amazing for CONCACAF, who really does run a lot of this. They are in charge of so much of this in a way that the individual federations, like for example, the US is not for this particular tournament. Would love to see that opportunity. Would see that growth and the recognition of how that can also grow. Well, Sandra, I could talk to you all day. As you know, we could chit chat forever about soccer and beyond. But why don't you tell the good people where they can find you for the rest of the Gold Cup and in the future?
Yeah, if you want to tune in to the rest of this incredible tournament, make sure you catch all the games across CBS Sports platforms.
Yeah, have I mentioned Paramount that it's Plus. On Paramount Plus? Yeah,
it is actually on Paramount Plus. You can catch some games as well for free on CBS Sports Golazo Network. So make sure that you take a look at all of our how to watches. Those are always up there and burning on CBSSports.com. And of course, we're also doing all sorts of game day coverage. So make sure you are following Attacking Third. We also have a little podcast of our own alongside the Late Sub. So make sure you follow wherever you can for all your women's soccer content.
Fabulous. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you.
So thank you again to Sandra for joining us. Good chat. Lots to talk about. We will have knockout rounds to discuss next week. This has been the state of the U.S. Women's National Team. This has been the state of the Gold Cup. Stay tuned. We will have more on some other sports later this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been The Late Sub.